everyone! This video is a little later than I had originally intended, but things got a little busy this weekend for me. I wish I could say I had a good excuse for delaying the video, but my excuses included going to Guinness Brewery up in Baltimore, getting my new phone, which led to me switching from an Apple to an Android, which meant that the transition wasn't completely clean, so I spent most of the weekend, getting my new phone up to snuff, and watching Star Trek DS9. So I wish I could say I had good excuses for prolonging the video, but I really didn't. I was just kind of a lazy asshole this weekend, drinking and messing with technology and watching Netflix. That's perfectly 21st century thing to do. But in any case, I'm here now. Time for me to cover the topics I wanted to cover in this video. Now, this is going to be my top 10 video for the month, where I mentioned in a previous video that my original plan was to do a top 10 match video for Hacksaw Jim Duggan, but that's been delayed. I'm probably going to push that back to August sometime. But I thought I would do a top 10 that's a little bit more current and a little bit more relevant to the modern day products, specifically WWE. And I thought that could lead to an interesting discussion. So I'll go ahead and do that with this video. But before I jump into the top 10, I want to do a little bit of a current events thing and talk about some of the things that are going on. Mainly with AEW. A very interesting announcement was made earlier this week. AEW will be holding their first television show live in the Capital One Arena in Washington, D.C., which is my neck of the woods, my backyard. I'm going to do everything in my power to get tickets to this thing. I don't know how quickly they're going to sell out or even if they are going to sell out. I have no idea. You can never predict with these things. But I'm definitely going to try and get tickets. A couple of friends texted me right after the announcement was made. It's like, all right, so we're doing this, right? It's like, yeah, fuck yeah, we're doing this. This is going to be great. Funnily enough, I've actually never attended a wrestling TV show. Well, actually, that's not true. I did attend an ROH TV taping about a year ago, but I've never been to a Raw. I've never been to a Smackdown. Never attended a Nitro or a Thunder back in the day. Never attended an Impact taping or anything like that. So this is going to be a kind of an interesting deal. It's going to work a little bit differently from pay-per-view, for example, but I have attended a few pay-per-views, including one WrestleMania, one SummerSlam. But, yeah, this is going to be a completely different animal, completely different experience. And now I get to experience AEW, the first televised episode of their weekly program on TNT, which has been announced, I believe, if I've got this right, it's going to be Wednesday nights, 2-hour show. Not a huge fan of it being a 2-hour show, because to me that's like you start running the risk of getting into Monday Night Raw territory where the show gets too long. I think Impact, for example, was a much better show when it was only an hour long. And now, they're stuck in this place where they don't have enough content to fill a 2-hour block, so they throw an old match out there to try and get people to buy their app. And it's like, man, that's sad. But I'd rather the show would just be an hour. But hopefully AEW doesn't struggle too much with filling that time frame. We'll see how that all goes. But anyway, I'm going to do everything I can to actually attend that show, and I think it's going to be very interesting and very exciting, especially depending on what happens at AEW's event All Out. And already there's things are, people on the internet are going a little nuts about potential things that could take place at that show. Mainly the potential appearance of one CM Punk, who has already been announced for StarCast that weekend. Does that mean he's going to show up at All Out? I have absolutely no idea. It could go either way. It's kind of like with Jon Moxley a couple months ago. It's like, all right, he could show up. It would be awesome if he did, but I'm not going to count on it. And that's kind of where I am with Punk right now. It's like, look, I'm not counting on him showing up. I'm not expecting him to show up, but it would be awesome if he did. And I think Punk right now would be like a very exciting get for AEW because of, the way he walked away from the WWE, and he's pretty much been gone from wrestling ever since then. So it'll be, I mean, that would be one hell of a surprise if he just showed up at the end of All Out. But again, we will see how all of that goes. So yeah, AEW things are pretty exciting right now, and I'm definitely going to try and attend that show for sure. I think that's going to be a very interesting experience, to say the least. A couple of other things floating around. We've got SummerSlam coming up in a couple weeks. We've got a couple matches already announced. We're doing Seth and Brock again. They're doing Kofi versus Orton for the WWE title. We've got Becky versus Natalya for the Raw Women's title. Feels like they didn't know what to do with Becky. We've got Bayley versus Ember Moon for the SmackDown Women's title, which again feels like they didn't know what to do with the SmackDown Women's title. And mainly it's because Charlotte Flair looks like she's going to be facing Trish Stratus. Now, that could be interesting. I haven't seen Trish in a while, not since Evolution, last year's pay-per-view. And putting her in there with someone like a Charlotte Flair, and, Charlotte would ideally go over. So it's like, oh, okay, that could be an interesting matchup. I wouldn't mind seeing that. And it looks like we're getting Miz versus Ziggler. We're getting Kevin Owens versus Shane McMahon in an I Quit match. And, looks like the SummerSlam card is building itself up. I'll have plenty more to say when I do my preview video. We've also got NXT TakeOver coming up that same weekend, I do believe, where it looks like there's a heavy possibility that the Undisputed Era, I still hate that name, the NXT Kingdom, as I like to call them, are going to walk out with all the NXT titles. I'm saying it's the women's title, but they're going to walk out with the tag title, the North American title, and the world title. That seems likely, but we'll see how that goes. The main event's kind of neat. I mean, I was just on the edge of being kind of bored with Gargano and Cole as a pairing, but then it's like, oh, it's a 2 out of 3 falls match. I'm like, we already saw that. It's like, oh, but they get to pick the gimmicks of each fall. Oh, okay. That's interesting. Okay, maybe they can make that a really cool matchup. We'll see. But yeah, I'm gonna have more to say as we get closer to the show, and that's about it as far as the current events goes. I still haven't caught up on the G1. I'm still I gotta find time to actually sit down and watch a bunch of these shows. But I've been told it's really good, and people tell me I need to watch it, so I'm gonna go ahead and try and do that. But for right now, I want to talk about Raw and SmackDown, and the news that was talked about a while ago, that Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff are going to be basically in charge of those shows. And Paul Heyman in charge of Raw, Eric Bischoff in charge of SmackDown, and there's been a lot of discussion about how much authority they're going to have. Vince McMahon recently said in an interview that he's going to give them a lot of control. I would hope that that's true, otherwise why put them there? Many more skeptical people have speculated that Heyman and Bischoff got those roles so that AEW wouldn't snag them up and get them involved in their programming. A lot of people are saying it's like, well, it doesn't really matter if they are in charge or not, because Heyman and Bischoff aren't going to be given that much authority anyway, and it's going to be Vince's, Vince is still the law of the land, and whatever he says is what's final, and whatever Heyman and Bischoff want to do, it just doesn't matter. So they're just there as figureheads. I don't know. Right now, based on what I'm seeing on the show, the promos are getting jazzed up a little bit, but a lot of those WWE-isms and a lot of those tropes are still there, and they haven't fully worked those kinks out, if they ever intend to work those kinks out. And like I said, if they were given any kind of significant control over the brands, it's going to take a while to fix that crap, because, I mean, you give me control over Raw, I wouldn't know where the hell to start. It's kind of like, I think I made the comment, it's like, you go clean a bathroom, and people shit all over the walls, and you just walk into the room, the whole room's brown. It's like, all right, clean it up. It's like, motherfucker, I don't even know where to start. It's just like, good God almighty. What do you even do? But for the sake of this video and this discussion, I thought, okay, let's assume that Bischoff and Heyman are given the proper amount of control to do exactly what they want to do to fix both Raw and SmackDown. Let's say that they are given significant amount of power and control over these shows. What this video will be about are 10 things that Heyman and Bischoff could do to make the shows better. And the things I've selected as my 10 items for them to look at, it isn't going to be anything like put the belt on so-and-so, or, or even something like switch up the commentary, because I wouldn't even know who to put at the booth at this point. They need to change like the style of commentary more than anything else, rather than the people that are actually there. But that type of stuff. has to be like down the road type of thinking. I'm thinking like, all right, immediately, what do you want to start doing like right now to fix like the basic bare bones structuring of both Raw and SmackDown on a week to week basis? Like things that you could do immediately to kind of like freshen up the show, help the shows, and actually make them seem like they're worthwhile and help fix some of the problems that have been plaguing the WWE for years and years and years and years. So, number one item on my list, like if I were going in there, Raw or SmackDown, doesn't matter. First thing I would say, it's like, all right, this wild card rule needs to stop. Like, it needs to go away yesterday. It needs to stop. If we're going to treat Raw and SmackDown like separate brands, and if we're going to actually move forward and give the shows their own identity, you cannot have guys and girls going back and forth on the show without any rhyme or reason. It's too random. It's too confusing. I'm sitting here. I watched Raw and SmackDown last week. I honestly cannot tell you with 100% certainty who is on which show. I honestly don't know. Because last time I checked, wasn't Becky Lynch a SmackDown person? But now she's the Raw Women's Champion. I have absolutely no idea. I don't know. And it's so confusing, I don't even want to bother to find out. And it doesn't really matter because everybody switches back and forth anyway. I saw Roman Reigns and Samoa Joe in matches on both Raw and SmackDown this week. I honestly couldn't tell you which show they're on. I don't know, and I don't care to find out. That's the situation we're in right now. It's too confusing, it's too messy, and if the roster is just switching back and forth anyway, it's that ultimatum thing. It's, all right, either get rid of the brand extension or end the wild card rule and actually keep the people on their own damn shows. And for the sake of my ultimate plan here, to give Raw and SmackDown their own identities, I would say, all right, do the brand split and keep them separate on different shows and allow the roster to be part of the differences between the two shows. That's a very basic thing. And the roster at this point, they're basically interchangeable cogs. They've been turned into that. So this isn't going to be like a huge, like, oh, it's going to fix the WWE overnight. I think Vince did it to, like, help the ratings. It's like, oh, Roman's going to be on the show. He's going to be on both shows every week. So that way it'll guarantee the higher audience. And it's like, that doesn't seem to be working, Vince. And it just makes the whole brand split even more confusing. So I would say end that immediately. And then work in a bunch of ideas of how you want to change the shows. Number two thing on my list revolves around the tag team division. Now, unlike the way it was in, like, I don't know, the late 2000s to mid 2010s maybe, where tag team wrestling was almost dead in the WWE, where at any given time they'd have 2 or 3 teams and have 2 sets of tag titles. There actually is no shortage of tag teams in the WWE right now. If you look at the main roster, off the top of my head, I can name, they've got the Revival, they've got the Usos, they've got, I think, is Sanity still there? I don't even know if Sanity's still there. They've got the Vikings, whatever their names are this week. They've got Heavy Machinery. They've got Daniel Bryan and Rowan. They've got the New Day. And I'm sure there's some teams that I'm missing. I think the Colognes are still there, much to my surprise. So they've got some teams. And they could probably build a solid division around that. The problem is they're all split out over 2 shows, and you've got 2 sets of tag titles. So instead of having, say, 8 or 9 teams, you've got 2 divisions of 4 to 5 teams, which isn't ideal and doesn't lend itself to variety of matches and like depth of competition, because for a division to work you need depth of competition. I'm going to reference the cruiserweight division in WCW, but one of the things that made that division so great is that you had a ton of different guys. And actually WCW as a whole, when WCW was at its best, the roster was so huge, and some would say it was too huge, and I tend to agree with that, but the benefit of having a large roster is that not everybody's holding a belt, and everybody's fighting for a chance to get a shot at a belt. So if one of the guys you like, if you're a fan, somebody you likes, gets a title shot, that's awesome. It's like, oh my god, my dude just got a TV title shot. That's amazing. Because this roster's got like 400 people on it. Not everybody gets a title shot. And, in today's day and age where it seems like everybody in the WWE gets a title shot just for sneezing, it really doesn't make title competition all that exciting. It doesn't make it feel like it's worth something. So my idea is to take all the tag teams on the main roster right now, take all of them, every single one, and put them all on one show, whether it be Raw or SmackDown, I don't care which one. But that allows that brand to offer tag team or male tag team wrestling. I'll circle back to that a little bit. It allows them to offer male tag team wrestling as like a thing that sets their brand apart and gives them an identity. Because that's a thing that Raw and SmackDown has struggled with ever since the brand split was first devised. Is that it felt like everything that Raw had, SmackDown had to have, and vice versa. Some exceptions, like when SmackDown had the Cruiserweight title, that was really one of the few differences. But, they both had to have a world champion. They both had to have a mid-card title, IC or US. They both had to have tag team champions. Eventually, they both had to have women's champions, women's and divas, and all that other stuff. So, it felt like they were just mirror images of the other, and there's no real distinct differences between the brands. So, one way to do that is to, all right, you have one set of male tag team champions, and they are on one show, and if you want to watch male tag team wrestling, you watch either Raw or SmackDown, wherever those belts end up. Next point, number 3 on my list, it revolves around the women's division. And again, this is kind of a similar thing. I think it's absolutely ridiculous to have 2 singles women's titles. I think it spreads the division too thin, and you don't have enough competition and variety of matches for both singles titles. I think it's crazy. And then you have the tag titles thrown on top of that, and that makes it even worse. By the time you're done, everybody's just spread out. You've got like 2 or 3 people going for each belt at any given time. There's just not enough competition. Not enough women on the roster. Even in the wake of this whole women's revolution thing, the women's roster is just not big enough to support 3 separate championships. So again, my original idea was to say, get rid of the tag belts, and then unify the 2 singles titles and put all the women on one show. I got called a sexist and a bigot for suggesting such a thing. How dare you not allow the women to be on one of the shows? It's not a question of not allowing them to be on one of the shows. It's my idea to maximize the potential of the women's division by making the competition and the variety of matches seem as exciting as possible. And if you want to watch the women's wrestling, they're all on either Raw or SmackDown. But I just got shouted down for being a bigot and a sexist. It's like, okay, compromise. I'll acquiesce to that. It's like, okay, unify the 2 singles titles and put it on one show. And all the singles female competitors will compete on that one show. On the second show, whichever one doesn't get the singles titles, they get the women's tag team titles. Preferably the one that does not have the male tag team title. So this way, by doing this, both shows offer women's wrestling, but a different way of presenting them. One will have the singles titles, one will have the tag titles. One will have the male tag team championship, and the other will have... one show will have the male's tag team championship and the singles female or the singles women's championship, and the other show will have the women's tag team titles, and that way both shows have tag teams, both shows have women, but a slightly different way of presenting them, and everybody's happy. So I would think that would be the case anyway, but who knows? But anyway, that's my idea of kind of like trying to help a little bit with the women's division. And even, and again, I'm not confident that they would have enough tag teams to get like a solid women's tag team division, but what they could do to kind of help it, make it a little easier, it's like, all right, on the show that gets the women's tag team division, let's have a rule where if a team breaks up, let's say the Iconics or the Kabuki Warriors, like they break up, the partners have a falling out, it's like, all right, the 2 women need to make a decision. Do they want to go to Raw over with the singles championship and compete in the singles division, or do they want to stay on the other show and they have 30 days to find a partner? If they want to stay in the tag team ranks, they have like 30 days to find a partner. And that way you can do the thing like, okay, this team broke up because they had a disagreement or one partner turned heel and attacked the other. It's like, okay, do you want to go to Raw or do you want to go to SmackDown? And whichever one they decide to stay on, if one of them decides to go to Raw and the other one decides to stay on SmackDown in the tag team ranks, that person will have 30 days to find a new partner, and that way you get a new team out of it, and you can build stuff on television with this woman trying to find herself a new partner. Or you could do a thing where both former partners decide to stay on the show with the women's tag team division, and both of them race to find a partner, and then you can do that feud down the road with the 2 tag teams between the 2 former partners. I'm just throwing ideas out there. I don't know. That's just my deal. But again, I have very little faith that they can get both a singles women's division to work and a tag team division. But if you want to try and get them to work, that is one way to certainly help by at least getting rid of one of the singles titles and making sure that the women offer something different on both shows. Whether it's something as simple as like one has the singles women and one has the tag team women, fine. That's my solution to fixing that problem, at least for right now. Number 4 on my list, fix the cruiserweight division. Show of hands, who the hell watches 205 Live? And if you do watch it, are you honestly invested in it? Because I tried to watch it a year ago and I just couldn't get into it. I felt like I was watching a bunch of dark matches from Smackdown, which is pretty much exactly what I'm watching. It felt like I was watching, if Smackdown is treated often as a B show, this felt like a C or a D show. And I'm not putting down those talents. I'm not. And I like that they have a pretty solid group of guys for the cruiserweight division. It's just a lack of promotion and lack of like any kind of intrigue to make it work. So, and you know, whatever they do on 205 Live, everything just builds to a pre-show match at the pay-per-view anyway. So it's hard to really get invested in it when they never treat any of it like it matters. And what they could do to fix that is to move the cruiserweight division to one show, whether it be Raw or SmackDown. If they want to keep 205 Live, I guess they could do that and just say let's say SmackDown gets the cruiserweight division because you know, the idea of Eric Bischoff being in charge of the cruiserweight division just tickles me. But you know, it's like history just repeats itself. The more things change, the more they stay the same. But you could call the 205 Live like the SmackDown branded SmackDown presents 205 Live or something like that. And you have the cruiserweights all on SmackDown. They are allowed to have matches on SmackDown. They have storylines on SmackDown. They have build-ups on SmackDown. One thing they could do to kind of add some life into the cruiserweight division, because the funny thing is, like, the WWE roster right now has a lot of guys that could probably fit into the cruiserweight division. They just aren't in the cruiserweight division. Guys like Aleister Black. Guys like Johnny Gargano when he moves up to the main roster. Guys like Rey Mysterio. When was the last time Rey Mysterio actually worked with cruiserweights? I feel like he's always in there with heavyweights. Finn Balor is another one that could potentially fit. These are guys that are, if they're not at that 205 weight limit, they're really, really close to it. And for me, it's like you can take like 2 or 3 of those guys that I just listed, put them in the cruiserweight division, and kind of let the rest of the division rub off on, or get a bit of a rub from them, and hopefully elevate the cruiserweight division in the eyes of the fans. Now, I think some people see any belt that isn't the main event title as like someone being stuck in like some kind of mid-card hell, whether it be tag belts or whether it be the cruiserweight belt or whether it be IC or US belts, and that's just kind of how like a lot of wrestling critics see it, and I think Vince McMahon certainly sees it. The only belts he cares about are the main event belts. And my thought on that is like, why can't the tag titles be a main event feud once in a while? Why can't the US title be a main event feud? Why can't the cruiserweight title be a main event feud once in a while? Because these are all things that have happened in the past. I mean, Jericho and Malenko, in the midst of the WCW NWO war, was one of the hottest angles in the company, and I loved it. You know, you don't have to have the world title involved in every single top story, and that's another thing. Like, you can have a specific episode focus on the cruiserweight division and focus on, I'll elaborate more on this later, but you can give them like a one-night story arc for the cruiserweight division and see if that helps elevate it in the eyes of the fans, because a lot of it's just all about promotion, and when you promote them, I remember when the cruiserweights were on the main roster, when they were on Raw every week, regularly, it was like, oh, nobody seems to care. It's like, well, they just have senseless tag matches every week. Of course nobody cares. Like, I don't care, and I like some of these guys. I like Cedric Alexander. I like Jack Gallagher. I like these guys, but they're just in tag matches every week, and I, honest to God, couldn't tell you, like, who won those matches, what was at stake, or anything. They were just mindless matches for the sake of having mindless matches. And, you know, when you look at how they promoted the women's division and how they were able to get them to main event WrestleMania, and granted, Ronda Rousey helped out a lot with that, but again, it's all a matter of promotion and kind of training the fans, finding something that hooks them, and kind of conditioning them to think of these things as a big deal. And You need the right people in those divisions to make it work. Like, you have the Road Warriors or some equivalent to that. Tag team match feels like a main event. If you have, I don't know, like a Roddy Piper going for the IC title, that feels like a main event. Things like that. But you could easily do something like that with the Cruiserweight division, especially with some of the talents I just named, the Aleister Blacks, the Finn Balor's, the Rey Mysterios, Johnny Gargano's, those guys. That'll give the Cruiserweight division a huge shot in the arm, and again, making it brand exclusive allows one of the shows to have a unique thing to offer that the other show does not, and help give the brand its own identity. Now, number 5 on my list, I'm up to 5 or 6. I've already lost count. Yeah, 5. Number 5 on my list is the 24/7 title. I'm going to start off right now and say I hate this thing. I've watched Raw the last 2 weeks, and the 24/7 stuff has made me gag. I fucking hate it. It's not funny. I don't get it. It just doesn't work for me. It doesn't appeal to me. I didn't like the Hardcore 27 title back in the day. I don't like this belt either. I can't stand it. But people seem to like it for whatever reason, because people were raving to me. It's, oh my god, it's the best thing on the show. And then I tune in and I'm like, I am absolutely miserable. I fucking hate this. So, but I will acquiesce and suggest keeping the 24/7 title, preferably on the show opposite from the Cruiserweight title. So that way, again, you have those like specific divisions. One show has the Cruiserweights, one show has the 24/7 title, which is basically a spiritual successor of the Hardcore title. Wouldn't that be funny if Eric Bischoff was in charge of the Cruiserweight division and Paul Heyman was in charge of the Hardcore title? Like, again, I'm a funny guy. I like it when history repeats itself. Okay, let's say that works out like that. Cruiserweights go over to Smackdown. Paul Heyman gets the new Hardcore title, basically. What are some things we can do that can keep the things that people seem to like about that title and also make it mean a little bit more? And off the top of my head, what I could think of is like, okay, because my major issues with it is that I don't understand why any human being would want to hold that title, because you're just constantly being attacked every week, and it's for a belt that doesn't mean anything, and you can't really do long-term storyline build-ups with it. It's just a bunch of random skits every week, and I don't see like the long-term potential of such a thing. So, okay, what if we turn the 24/7 title into kind of a, for lack of a better term, what if we turn it into kind of like a game show? Where let's say Paul Heyman goes out on Raw, it's like, all right, once a month, I'm going to sound a buzzer on a random episode of Monday Night Raw. You don't know when I'm going to sound it. You don't know when I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it randomly. It will happen on air. The 24/7 title will operate as it does, with title changes happening on or off the show. Titles on the line 24/7. Whoever is holding the 24/7 title, the moment I set off the buzzer, wins a special prize that month. And the buzzer will be sounded once a month. So it's like, all right, so you have to tune in to see if and when the buzzer will get sounded. You have to tune in to see who's going to be the 24/7 champion at this time the buzzer goes off. And you have to tune in to see whatever the prize is. Now, what would the prizes be? I don't know. If it's in January, the winner gets a spot in the Royal Rumble between, he gets to draw from numbers 25 to 30. If it's the same month as, say, Money in the Bank pay-per-view, all right, the winner gets to be in the Money in the Bank ladder match. Or the winner gets a guaranteed spot at WrestleMania and a payday that goes along with that. Or the ability to challenge whoever he wants for a match at WrestleMania. Whatever the case is. Whatever the random prize is. So at least it gives people a little bit more of a motivation to actually hold the stupid thing. And there's a little bit more of a point to it, and it keeps the randomness of the title changes and the potentially the hilarious skits that people seem to like so much. So you get a best of both worlds situations with it, and it would be at least a little bit more tolerable for the people like me that can't stand the damn thing. But that's just one idea I would present to kind of fix the 24/7 title. Now, my idea sounds very game showy and not the most intelligent thing, but at least it impacts storylines. At least there's it creates the illusion that there's a purpose to this damn belt. Is basically what I'm trying to say. That's the best I could come up with to fix the 24/7 title. Make it brand exclusive, and then do the game showy crap that I just talked about to try and make it mean something, anything. Hopefully that would work. But in any case, so number 6 on my list involves the male singles titles. Now, what do we do with the male singles titles? Well, if you know me, I never liked the idea of having 2 world champions. So I would unify the WWE World Title and the Universal Title immediately. And whoever holds the Unified World Championship is the only competitor that is allowed to participate in both Raw and SmackDown. So that makes the world title spot more special. He's the one guy that can participate on both shows regularly while he's the champion, and while he's defending the title against someone on Raw. On SmackDown, they could be competing for a shot at the title or have a massive blood feud be the main story over there. Whatever. But I like the idea of having one world champion for one company. And that's one way of presenting that world champion, I would think, is to have him be the one guy that can participate on both Raw and SmackDown. And whichever show he's currently competing on, depending on who he's defending the title against, then that would allow the other show a little bit more freedom. And it's like, all right, then we can have contenders matches, we can have a massive blood feud be our pay-per-view main event, or anything like that. A bunch of different things they can do. And it makes the world title spot mean a lot more, because there's only one guy holding the world title. Now, underneath that, I would keep both the IC and the US titles, and let them be the brand-specific championships. Let's say the IC champion is basically the Raw World Champion. Not World Champion, but you know what I mean. Like the Raw Heavyweight Champion. And whoever's holding the US title is the SmackDown Heavyweight Champion. And so that would be like the clear-cut division. You have one guy who's champion of the entire company, and then you have these other two guys, these two belts, and they are champions of the specific brands, Raw and SmackDown. And that would be a way to kind of create a more clear distinction between what it means to hold these singles titles. And while the world title is clearly above the IC and the US titles, they do mean a lot, because you're basically the best guy on the brand if you hold one of those two titles. So elevates their importance, and it's one less title to worry about. One of the problems in WWE today is that they have way too many titles. I've said that a million times. So basically what I tried to do here with selections 2 to 6, basically try to change the title situation, drop a few of the belts, and do the best I can, and try and use titles to create a different identity for both Raw and SmackDown, and see what we could do with that. But I've got 4 more selections to go, and these are going to be centered more around changing the overall presentation and structure of the show. And this is something I talked about, especially in regards to with Heyman. He's going to want to change the promos, and I think he's already had influence on that if you watched Raw or SmackDown, especially Raw. I think he has had some influence on changing the promos at least a little bit, and they seem a little less stilted than before. And with Bischoff, I've talked about, like, with television production, how he's going to want to change the entire look of the show. Because right now, there's really no aesthetic difference between the two brands. One's red and one's blue, and that's basically it. They look the same. WWE is basically presented, structured, and produced the exact same way it's been for about 20 years. Like, it's so funny to me, but I've made this point with people, but okay, watch one show from each year, from 1990 to 1999. And it's almost like I can tell you what year it came from based on the look of the show, because the show would change, and the show, no two venues looked alike. Like, the venue would always look different. And now do that same thing from 2010 to today. I honestly, aside from the guys on the roster, because the faces always change, I wouldn't be able to tell you what year it's from, because it's looked exactly the same for for God knows how long. It's like they hit this sweet spot in 2000 where it's like they got the production and the look of the show exactly how they've always wanted it, and then they hardly ever changed it. The only changes I've noticed are when they, like, added LED boards, which... Is that really, like, that significant of a change? Not really. It is, it kind of adds to the stale, monotonous feel that the WWE product currently has in 2019. So for number 7 on my list, one thing that I would definitely recommend that Heyman and Bischoff do is try to give Raw and SmackDown their own visual identities, besides the coloring. And I think, you look at what Heyman and Bischoff have done in their own respective histories. Eric Bischoff took WCW and made them look like they were prime time and high class stuff, compared to what it was in the Bill Watts era. There were some matches and material and feuds I loved in 1992 WCW, but the look of the show was putrid. It looked low rent as fuck, and it looked absolutely terrible. But when Bischoff took over, the show looked a lot better, and it looked awesome, honestly. And you look at what Nitro was doing during its peak, let's say 96 to 98. The show looked incredible from a production standpoint, and it looked real, and it looked, whenever they did backstage segments, like the infamous one of the Outsiders attacking the WCW roster and throwing Rey Mysterio into the side of the truck, it looked real, and like they were actually capturing something as it was taking place in real time. And I think Bischoff had a lot of influence onto the production side of things and making it look good. And then you look at ECW. I mean, Heyman basically presented a show that looked like garbage and made the garbage, just the way we wanted it. It's very weird. He made that its identity. And I'm not saying I want Raw to look like garbage. I'm just saying Heyman knows how to do a lot with very little and can maximize the potential of things with minimal effort. So I'm sure both of them have a ton of ideas on how Raw could look better or how SmackDown could look better and how they could look distinct from one another besides just having a blue show and a red show. And even if you look at comparing Nitro and Thunder, Thunder looked a lot different from Nitro. And that was one of the few things I loved about Thunder. It's it looks like a completely different show from Nitro. And that's great. And it doesn't feel like I'm just watching a blue version of what I saw on Monday night. And even down to the venues. And I miss back in the day when you knew when a show was held in MSG because it had the entrance ramp right in the, opposite from the hard cam side. And Bruce Pritchard said in one of his podcasts that he hated that. And he said it didn't make the show look good at all. It's I would argue it made it look distinct. I knew right away I was watching an MSG show and, watching AEW Fight for the Fallen and that a theater-looking venue that they had, I was that caught my eye instantly. Or something like Lucha Underground. The first match I ever saw at Lucha Underground, it was Ivelisse versus Sexy Star. Not a bad match, but not exactly the, this dynamic matchup that would, convert a fan instantly. But I just noticed the look and the style and the presentation of the show. It's I've never seen a wrestling show that looks like this. And then I think the next segment after that, it was Drago and Dario Cueto talking in a bathroom, and it looked so cinematic and awesome. I'm oh my god, I've definitely never seen a wrestling show that looks like this. And those type of things are very eye-catching. And giving Raw and SmackDown their own visual identities, I think would go a long way towards not only creating different brand identities, but freshening the show up. Because like I said, it's nothing has changed since the year 2000, it feels like, as far as the production goes. And I would like to see that fixed. Another thing, moving right along on my list, number 8. Another thing I would like to see is a ranking system. And I kind of alluded to this earlier, but, and we all talk all the time about how wins and losses should matter. If you win, you move up. You lose, you move down. It's that simple. I would like to see a return to that. And for me, the ideal ranking system would be what Crockett had back in the late 80s, where they would give you weekly updates on the top 10 contenders of the tag team division and the singles division. And if you were the mid-card champion, let's say when Rick Rude was the U.S. champion, he was typically ranked number 1. But because he's the U.S. champion, he has other duties, so he didn't always get that title shot right away. There was always some excuse for why the mid-card champion couldn't face the world champion, but it elevated the status of the mid-card title by having him ranked so highly. And it also painted the picture. It's so-and-so lost, so he moved down, and so-and-so won, so he moved up. And you could do weekend updates based on house shows. Actually make house shows count. How cool would that be? And it really doesn't have to be that complicated, I don't think. I remember when TNA tried to do a ranking system, and I make fun of them for it all the time, but they tried to work in fan voting, and I'm why the fuck should the fans have a say in who gets ranked? That's stupid. Well, no, here's the thing. What you should do is pay attention to who the fans are supporting, and then have them win on TV based on who they're supporting, and then adjust the ranking system. Oh, so and so moved up. It's like, oh, the guy that got really over moved up the ranking. How crazy is that? Because he won some matches. Um, yeah, and whether or not they get over should determine whether or not you decide they should go over, unless you have like a storyline in place to help them out or whatever. But the way TNA did it, it was straight up like fan voting was going to be like a part of determining how highly you get ranked. I'm like, that is the most idiotic thing I've ever heard in my life. And Smackdown tried a ranking system last year that just made no sense at all. God, that was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. So yeah, just have a ranking system based on wins and losses. It's really not that hard. Especially since you get to choose who wins and who loses. Or even just like, the rosters the way they are, it's like you can have guys like just competing to get into the top 10. Like, say, poor Zack Ryder, who, like, that guy, he'd be like, oh, man, I want to get ranked number 10 just to prove I can hang with the big dogs. So make that, like, something that motivates him. I don't know. I'm just throwing ideas out there. But I'd like to see some kind of a ranking system that actually makes sense, focused on wins and losses, and makes the titles feel more important, and actually creates an ongoing showcase for who's ranked where and who's in contention for what title. So I think that would be interesting. And, the way things are, you could have, like, a cruiserweight ranking, I guess 24/7 ranking wouldn't make any sense since it's random as fuck anyway, but tag team rankings and women's tag team rankings and women's singles rankings and all sorts of things like that. So it will also help, like, make things make a little bit more sense. And number 9 on my list of suggestions for Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff to apply changes to Raw and SmackDown. It's something that a lot of us have been saying for years, but end the scripted promos. It is so hard for guys to convey their natural selves or to come across as a larger-than-life personality when they're forced to memorize dialogue earlier that day and then recite it on the fly there in front of a live crowd. And so often they're micromanaged to such a degree that what they say doesn't sound natural at all. Like, and this extends to the commentary as well. I don't believe that any human being would call a hospital a local medical facility. And why Vince insists that they do, I don't get it. And the constant talking in exposition and recaps. Like, take a shot every time somebody gets on the stick and says last week. You'll be dead by the midway point of the show. And it's all these little things that makes the dialogue sound very stilted and very unnatural. And even back when I was a kid and you had guys like The Ultimate Warrior and Roddy Piper and Randy Savage and Ric Flair, these guys that would just fly off the handle and say all sorts of crazy shit. At least I believed every word that... I believed that they believed every word that they were saying. So they came across very naturally, even if they came across like complete psychopaths. And those larger-than-life personalities, you can't really... The current system doesn't even allow that because they're forced to recite scripted dialogue that they memorized earlier that day and they're not even trained to be able to act or recite scripted dialogue. So a lot of them just sound very stilted and very unnatural. Some guys can do it. Miz can do it. But other than that, it's just kind of like, I'd rather go back to the days of just letting the guys come up with their own stuff. You can't script Jake Roberts and some of the stuff that he came up with. You can't script Ted DiBiase and some of the promos that he came up with. It would be a lot more fun if you just let the guys go out there and be themselves. And sometimes that's a very sink or swim scenario, and some of them are going to fall flat on their face. Some guys might need a manager to talk for them, but I'd rather have that than have this boring paced promo crap that we've been given for the last, 20 years or so, and it's just gotten increasingly worse. And as Vince finds the new thing that he gets upset over, like no longer referring to things as a hospital, a local medical facility, and that type of stuff, it's like, dude, can we just go back to having them like get their personalities over and show us what they can do? Can we go back to that? I mean, fuck, I'd rather have Jumping Jeff Farmer than listening to boring, scripted paint by numbers promos every single week. But that's just me. But I think just letting the guys react normally and come up with their own stuff, both the wrestlers and the commentators, I think that would go a long way towards fixing Raw and SmackDown and fixing the WWE, and again, making it feel less monotonous and less paint by numbers and more like can't miss television, because if you have this unpredictable person that's going to say anything he wants, I'm like, well, crap. What's he going to say? I want to tune in and see what he says. Kind of like the appeal of that Stone Cold, The Rock, Randy Savage, Roddy Piper, all these other guys had back in the day. Again, nothing I said here is nothing that hasn't been said by 1,000 other people for years now, but it bears repeating, especially when we have the situation where Eric Bischoff and Paul Heyman, who I know are going to want to do something like that, are given some level of power in the WWE. So fingers crossed, hopefully they are allowed to make those changes. And like I said, I have noticed some changes in the promos on Raw, in the stuff that the guys are allowed to say. Still not fully fixed yet, but I do see Heyman's influences on the microphone side of things. So there is that. And the last suggestion I have for fixing Raw and SmackDown and potentially making it better, changing the structure of the show completely. Because there are certain things, and I was so happy when Heyman mentioned it in an interview where he said, so much of these shows are dedicated to making the matches, and I don't think that that's compelling television. And that, I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. And I'm like, yes, I agree. Matchmaking is not compelling television. I'm not going to sit around and question where the hell these matches came from. And it's one of those things that started in the Attitude Era because they were competing with WCW and they were trying to keep the show unpredictable. And you had this Austin McMahon storyline going on with the evil boss trying to screw with Austin and making matches and changing the rules on the fly. But they've been doing it for over 20 years now, and it's like, I don't think anybody in the WWE even knows why they were doing it for as long as they were. I don't think anybody, if I asked anybody in WWE, they couldn't tell me why people, why they dedicate so much of the programming to making matches, whether it be Teddy Long making a tag match in the opening segment, having a 30-minute segment with 8 guys piling into the ring just so you can make a match later in the show. Just waste of time. It's just such a waste of time. And what's that old saying? Brevity is the source of wit. It's like, dude, just get to the fucking point. And, you can announce matches ahead of time. I'm not going to sit there and question where the hell these matches come from. Other things that they could do to alter the structure. Just because 2 guys are feuding doesn't mean that they have to be on screen together every single week. Because that creates a certain level of monotony on it, all its own, where 2 guys might have a pay-per-view match, and by the time you get to the pay-per-view, I've already seen them brawl, I've already seen them interfere in each other's matches, I've already seen them tag against each other, and I've probably already seen them have a singles match at some point. So by the time you get to the pay-per-view, I'm already burnt out on it. There are ways to keep them apart, which I'm going to elaborate on in just a second, but there are ways to keep them apart without having them interact with each other in every single segment that they're a part of. And there's, you can give guys squash matches, or you could do an injury angle where a guy's off TV for a couple weeks and you're having the heel cut promos on the guy, or you could, there's a variety of things that you can do, but they've kind of like settled on just doing things the way they've been doing them for so long. And again, I don't even think they know why they do things the way they do them. And, any little changes to those structurings could help fix the monotony of the programs. And another thing they could do, I kind of already alluded to it, but give guys time off. Like, you don't need to have Seth Rollins on TV every week. And there's a reason why the guys like Undertaker and Brock Lesnar and Triple H feel special whenever they show up. It's like, well, because they're not on TV every week. So everybody talks about it like, oh, but the part-timers are more over and they're bigger stars. It's like, well, yeah, like, again, what's that other old saying, how can you go away? How can I miss you if you don't go away? Undertaker feels like a big deal whenever he shows up because he's not there all the time. Brock Lesnar feels like a big deal because he's not there all the time. I'm not saying everybody, Seth needs to be off TV for 6 months. I'm just saying, it's like, look, if he had a big segment on Raw one week, he doesn't have to be there for the next 2 weeks. And you can even do stuff like filming him going off and making an appearance or something, or doing, I don't know, things, he's going off and helping out at this charity or something, and you can air that segment during the week. You don't have to have him in the arena, speaking in front of the crowd, and having a match every single episode of Monday Night Raw. So, if you cut back on the amount of screen time that guys have, you actually make them feel more special because I don't see them all the time. And again, I reference all the time, when I was a kid, I did not see Hulk Hogan wrestle on free TV very often. Saturday night's main events felt like a big deal because that was like the one time I was guaranteed to get a Hogan match. And if I wanted to see him wrestle, typically I would have to pay for it either by attending a live event or buying the pay per view. Well, my parents did it because I was super, super young and I had no money. But you get what I'm saying. Um, the overexposure and the oversaturation of the talents has really led to them not feeling like special attractions anymore. They're just there to be, as CM Punk once put it, a spoke on the wheel, and then they just keep it going and going and going until that person needs to be switched out, and then they put somebody else in there, and they just keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. Actually, go back to what I said at the very first suggestion with the wild card rule. That just makes it even worse because guys are jumping back and forth between the two shows. So it's like, I'll be tuning into a 3-hour show and I get 30 minutes of Roman Reigns, and then I tune into SmackDown, and then I get 15 to 20 minutes more of Roman Reigns. It's like, oh my god, I'm so done with this. Ah! And that's really hurt a bunch of the guys, namely like the Roman Reigns and the Seth Rollins and the Kofi Kingstons and guys like that have really suffered from being on TV on a consistent basis every single week. And we live in this day and age where if somebody's not on TV one week, everybody like flips out and has a fucking panic attack. It's like, no, it's fine if they're not on TV one week. There's ways to make them feel more special. And, I would like for, if Seth Rollins comes out and, while he's the champion and comes out into the arena, that should feel like a big deal. And it doesn't. It feels like an expected occurrence. And, cutting back on that, I know that's hard to do with a 3-hour time frame on Monday Night Raw, but those are there are ways that you can fill that time, I think. And 3-hour Raws are not ideal. And actually, people might be wondering, why didn't I suggest shortening Raw to 3 hours, or from 3 hours to 2 hours? Like, well, I don't know if that's possible at this point. Like, I don't even know if that's even feasible at this point. But you can manage the time that you're given a lot better than what you're doing. And again, 3 hours, not ideal. I understand that. And it's hard to fill that time. But what they've done to fill that time has been terrible. So I'm suggesting ideas to help improve it. And, if you go with the ideas that I had of, like, let's say Raw gets the male tag team champions and the women's tag team champions, and both of those are fully fledged divisions. You can have a bunch of matches, from the tag division and the women's division fill up time on TV somewhat easily and have that take up a full 3 hours. And you don't even have to have the world champion on the show right away while you're doing that. And you could have like a major feud, have a major angle on the show, something, any, whatever. I remember there was an episode of Raw back in '98 where it looked like the New Age Outlaws had joined the corporation. That was the main arc for the night. And it's like the top tag team in the company, are they going to turn heel or not? And that was basically the story of the show. You don't have to like kind of lockstep yourself into just focusing on the same exact things every single week. And there's plenty of ways to create exciting programming beyond just like focusing on the exact same people every week. So those are my 10 suggestions. Some of them are kind of like 3 or 4 suggestions built in to each one, but maybe I need to do like a whiteboard with a whole like, diagram, flow chart showing the entire thing. But in any case, I think that this is a fun discussion to have, and I think Eric Bischoff and Paul Heyman being in charge of SmackDown and Raw, respectively, does create some interesting possibilities. Now, am I going to be the cynical asshole that sits here and says, I don't really think it's going to change that much? Probably. I highly doubt that Vince McMahon is going to give them as much control as they need to really, really get the shows where they need to be, but it is what it is. And again, it's fun to talk about, so, and that's what this channel is all about, just having fun discussions about wrestling and various other things. But that is all I have for you now. Thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment down below, and hit the little bell icon so you get notified when I post a new video. But that is all I have for you now. I do have one more video before the month is up, and then as SummerSlam gets closer, I'm going to have a preview video for that as well, and a lot of discussion centered around SummerSlam. And especially as we get closer to All Out, I'm going to have a lot of things to say about that. So be on the lookout for all of that stuff. But for right now, I am done. Thank you all for watching. Enjoy what little is left of your weekend, and I will see you all later.